A while back I said in a scenario like The Walking Dead's outbreak that humanity would not be entirely crippled by the advent of the undead. It's not often that we get a story that depicts life during and, more importantly, after a zombie apocalypse where society at large mostly managed to persevere, albeit with some large disquality of life deteriorations. It wouldn't be this quirky, let's go out and hunt some zombies with no repercussions, goof trip every day like Zombieland, nor would things be so simple that things would just be outright over for humanity like Romero's films. The only things that come to mind along the lines of a true aftermath is the ending of Shaun of the Dead or the world coming to terms with everything in warm bodies. But both of those are done in a very satirical and comedical sense. Zombies, as they are in most cases, are not a permanent world-ending threat. They would just become a way of life, changing the norm of how society functions and how each person lives and dies. One exemplary example of this is the 2015 film Maggie, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Abigail Breslin. Directed by Henry Hobson, creator of shorts involving Halo and XCOM, as well as designing title cards for 2009's Sherlock Holmes and 2013's The Last of Us. The latter of his previous work can definitely be felt for inspirations for the two characters of Wade and Maggie, as the story centers around a father doing the best of what he can in a world that has bitterly accepted the terms of what the zombie outbreak has brought upon the human race, and more importantly, what it means for his daughter. But what does that mean for them as characters, as people? And what does a dark outlook from their perspectives mean for displaying the subject of today's video, as we discuss The film opens up with Maggie leaving a voice message to her dad saying she has run away to a nearby town under strict curfew while advising her father Wade not to come for her. As Wade makes his way downtown driving semi-fast, his radio broadcasts details of the outbreak of the Necroambulist virus that has ravaged the world through crop infection. Details fully explain that even though metropolitan and inner city areas were the worst hit by the virus, swift response by armed and emergency units quelled the outbreak, with new infection rates decreasing by 30% in just a week's time. Martial law and cleanup efforts are still well underway by the events of the film. Within only a few months, the pandemic has been, for the most part, suppressed. But that doesn't mean its threat isn't ever pervasive. Humanity has persevered, but it's still struggling heavily in the remains, especially in its uncertain future and how to tackle it and the virus that still lingers out there. Zombies can still roam dark corridors. Crops can still harbor the infection. It is still possible that at any moment you could be bitten or have the Necroambulist virus transmitted to you. In the span of a few weeks, a litany of changes will occur throughout the body, from darkened veins, whitened and then blackened eyes, no sense of pain, blackened ooze taking the place of the very blood flowing through you. And the telltale sign of the beginning of the turn is an elevated sense of smell. All of this will happen to the infected, and eventually culminate into turning a person into a cannibalistic feral monster, wanting nothing more than to consume the flesh of any living thing while losing all semblance of self. Maggie, panicking, not knowing what to do after being bitten, attempts to stay away from her family with her ill-gotten affliction until her father finds her in a hospital being detained in isolation. Because of Wade's relationship with the town doctor and local police department, he is allowed to take her home so she can spend her last few weeks with her family. Considering she was missing for her first 2 weeks, she now only has about 4 to 6 weeks left to live. On their way back home, Wade stops for gas to find the station owner has fully turned in private, forcing him to kill the mindless infected and giving him a glimpse of what's to come for his daughter. This instance will be only one of a few moments where actual zombies appear on screen fighting the living. This is unlike most zombie media, as the focus of this film is centered around a few important elements that are more about the ramifications of what zombies and the idea of becoming one and them spreading will do to people. First, Wade caring for his dying offspring and knowing most of what he does is in vain and what he has to do in the future. Second, Maggie coming to terms with her mortality at such a young age and turning the coming of age story into a coming of death one. Third, how the world will now function with those that become infected and how they will be treated or taken care of. And lastly, no one really knows how to handle this state of affairs from the perspective of authority, friends, family, and even parents. This is all exemplified in the microcosm of their old family ranch, where a majority of the film takes place, and the few locations nearby that made up their memories. Upon arrival, we see her stepmother packing her children's bags as they are about to be sent away, not wanting to risk her own children, as Maggie lives out the remainder of her days at the family homestead. Maggie's half-sister just thinks she is sick, pointing to her bite wound, comparing it to her own scratch. The idea of a terminal illness making her sister into a zombie doesn't quite connect as she goes on about her day, awaiting the trip to stay with her aunt. Her half-brother, a bit older and wiser than his sister, knows the reality of what is ailing Maggie, mentioning a schoolmate of his he didn't like that fully turned and became a zombie only to die. With solace in his face, he asks if the infection causes any pain, and questions why they too can't stay with Maggie in her final days. Maggie knows it's too risky for them to stay, and more so than that though, is the fact that his mother, her stepmother, is too afraid they will get it as well. Her final words to him being,
"I missed you, kiddo." "Missed you too."
They both smile and acknowledge their love for each other, and a faint moment of normality attempts to set in. It's then that a distant boom of thunder is heard in the distance as she is reminded that she won't ever see him again. This foley of thunder remains a constant sound throughout the film. There is never actually a storm, just a looming storm that never actually comes. But it always sits in the distance as a warning of the storm that is looming forth. Maggie does what she can to cover up the Necroambulist's effect on her body, looking for shades to cover up how her eyes will go from reddened, then whited out, and finally blackened. She doesn't want to be viewed as a biohazard, a danger, a pariah, a monster, even though that's basically how she has begun to view herself. She tears up pamphlets describing the Necroambulist virus and what has to be done once symptoms have begun to set in. She attempts to call a friend, and when it goes to voicemail, cannot muster any words to say to them. She is seen picking at her bite wound as if it were just a simple scab like any young or even old person would do with a wound they wouldn't pay much mind to. Going out to the backyard, she swings in her childhood swing set to reminisce and distract herself. While the family makes food and chops wood, the weight of reality, the memories of her attack, cause her to fall to the earth and break her finger in the process in a very morbid way. Maggie feels no pain from it, but the sight of the blackened ooze permeating from her wound causes her to panic, unable to face what is going on inside her own body. While her stepmother calls for a doctor, Maggie, in an erratic state to eliminate her grim reminder of what's to come, cuts off the finger and throws it in the garbage disposal. Running away from their home again, she can only cry as she glares at the nub she has just created. It's then that the nearby groans of two zombies cause her to stare at her own fate. A man named Nathan and his daughter Julia have fully turned and slowly shamble towards her. Wade appears behind her and tells her to run home so she doesn't have to witness what happens next. Wade wants to do what had to be done alone, attempting to talk to Nathan to get some kind of human-like response, knowing it would be fruitless. He didn't want to do what he had to do. Cutting the man down, he simply just stares at the little girl. mummified in appearance, charred in flesh, dead by all accounts, looking into what his daughter will be soon enough. Wade's journey as a father through this grim time being full of uncertainty of what to do, all except for one thing: to do what he promised to his wife before she had passed away, to always protect and look after Maggie, no matter what. The life he built with his original family is crumbling. The pandemic, forcing farmers to burn their crops, symbolizes this as he goes out at night and can only bear witness to the roaring flames that destroy his life's work and ambition. And, with time ticking, his options becoming fewer and fewer for his original family. Later that night, a call to the local police is made to look into the 2 dead and zombified people in order to dispose of their bodies. Not only that, but to come to the conclusion that the mother of the family, Bonnie, kept them in confinement in their own home without notifying anyone, trying to avoid them being sent to quarantine in their final days, giving her family a sense of home and peace before they fully turned. An unquestionable act for a desperate parent, but from an outsider's perspective, is the wrong course of action for the greater good. Wade speaks with both officers, stating if they come for Maggie in any way, he will fight back, and they will understand why. The dichotomy of both officers' mentality about Maggie's state of affairs I will speak on later, but what stands out from their conversation is Sheriff Pierce telling Wade this.
Think about what you had to do today, what you might have to do in the future.
Something Wade wholeheartedly already knew, but is now facing head-on more and more. The mirroring of Wade having to kill these 2 zombies, all while his wife was stating that
Bonnie should have taken him in.
But both options, killing the zombified family member or sending them off to quarantine, is out of the question for him, not wanting to lose his little girl, but his wife, the non-biological step-parent of his child, wanting to settle it as soon as possible by hinting at what needed to be done. Her stepmother, Caroline, can barely look her in the face or in her general direction when she first arrives, both unable to think of what to say to each other, and Caroline fearing that she may turn at any moment. The sheer idea of someone near her becoming a zombie has her recoil and go blank at every chance. Maggie's bite wound reveals itself at dinner, causing Caroline to bluntly say, "Can you cover that up? Why are you not wearing bandages?" A very touchy subject that causes Maggie to run upstairs, ashamed of herself and ashamed of who she is becoming. Her stepmom says she can't bear to look at it in any degree, despite how it will make Maggie feel since she is the one who is dying. But in the case of her becoming a zombie, many can't blame her for these actions. A small but important blink and you'll miss it moment in the movie is during their first conversation, where they don't even look at each other, pretending to act normal as they get ready for dinner. While Caroline is doing the dishes, she is desperately brushing the blackened gunk from her dishware, but is not able to scrape it off, as she is barely able to hold it together, symbolizing no matter how much she tries to erase the sight, this grim black ooze will be something she sees more of as the virus turns her stepdaughter's own blood into a blackened abyss. After Wade puts down the 2 zombies, she even says that Bonnie should have taken them into quarantine instead of keeping them alive at home. That is just the more sensible thing instead of relying on emotions taking control of your actions. Bonnie, the mother of the family of the 2 zombies, eventually shows up at Wade's front porch, brandishing a gun in a quiet, hysterical state, asking Wade how Maggie's condition is before recounting how inhumane and sterile doctors had been about how she should act with her infected child, Julia. Scared of how officials say that a physical touch was against the rules to lock the infected in a room by themselves each and every night, the idea of leaving a 4-year-old to themselves every single night to face their own mortality Bonnie spoke of how her and her husband Nathan would take turns each night sleeping in bed with their child to comfort her. But one night, Nathan had not come out from the room. He had locked the door because he himself had been bitten and infected by their own daughter, locking himself in with her to prevent Bonnie from becoming another victim. Wade walks her to their dead bodies as she mourns over their corpses, a fate that could have been avoided for Nathan if he had just followed the guidelines set by the quarantine efforts. Bonnie is later carried away in police custody for harboring infected. Not only that, but she must now face a world without her daughter, but also her husband, and possibly being stuck in imprisonment. As cold and harsh as the rules are now, there is a reason for them being in place, even for a parent losing their child. Could you say any differently if it was for the greater good? The world outside of the family's experiences struggles to figure out how to return to normalcy as we get hints of it scattered in the background noise and chatter of radios and other people.
What do you think about the schools opening up?
No, we need to stop pretending bad things ain't happening out there.
Bad thing?
One being a man rushing things to be done with the epidemic and making it a distant memory. That's all he wants to do, saying simply that, you know what, bad things happen every day, that's just something we have to deal with. While his female co-host is baffled at making such light of a gigantic tragedy that fell upon the world at large. They also continue to argue if the concrete fact of 6 to 8 weeks to turn is legitimate or not, as some people can turn even sooner depending on their anatomy, DNA, immune system, and area of bite wound. Some argue that there shouldn't be any dilly-dallying in taking the infected into quarantine, and that they should basically nip the Necroambulist virus in the bud whenever it crops up, no matter how immoral it may be. The second you're infected, you should already be shipped off to prevent any more infections. This is also perfectly personified in the two cops that show up numerous times at Wade's home. Sheriff Pierce and Deputy Holt represent how the population will react in these given cases. Sheriff Pierce understands the extreme difficulty of giving up not only a family member, but a child in what seems like a callous and emotionless manner, but saying that when the time comes, a choice has to be made. There is no turning back. While Deputy Holt is the embodiment of fear and wanting to eradicate anything that can cause any harm or danger, as he bluntly states that no one is immune to the law and of how things must go down. Quarantine rules must apply to everyone, or else more harm can be done. The fact that Wade was there to kill 2 stray infected means that they could have easily infected more people if he had not been there. It's a simple fact of life now. If you allow an infected person to fully turn, things can get much worse. When Maggie is taken to the hospital for a follow-up on her condition, especially since she chopped off a finger, she is seen smiling and interacting with 2 children. This is the most normal she's felt in a while. After taking off her glasses that masked who she was becoming, does the nearby mother see the state she is in and quietly urges her children to get away from her. She quickly readorns her glasses again, feeling like a leper amongst normal people. The doctor notes her blackened veins, abnormally strong heartbeat, and asking why she would cut off her own finger. Maggie, jokingly, like what a teenager would say about being self-deprecating, says, "What good's a finger if her whole arm is falling off?" Showing us how much it doesn't matter what happens to her, because in her own mind, she is already dead. Not only to herself, but those around her. When the doctor leaves, she breaks down in tears, as Wade can only silently console her. Wade is told by the doctor that the virus in her is actually progressing faster than any other person, and that the time is coming where she won't want normal food, but the flesh of the living, and that she will begin to smell others like they are meat. In a humane way, He states he will report her infection is progressing at a normal pace so that Wade can be bought time to figure out what he can do so she is not sent away to quarantine to die alone. He gives Wade 3 options, with the first one being out of the question being quarantine itself. The second, a medical concoction that is used at these quarantine sites that would allow her to die at home in an extremely painful manner. Or the final option, a quick and painless way of a gunshot to the head. Wade's choices are to come as distant thunder looms louder.
What's option 3?
Make it quick.
The next few days are of peaceful normalcy as they laugh at dinner together, reminisce about her deceased mother, talking about how much her mother loved books and daisies and why her nickname was Daisy in the first place, and why Wade continuously fixed up a busted old truck. That truck being a form of his old life he desperately works to hold on to, no matter how rickety and shambled it might be. They cherish these moments and smile the best that they can. One night, Maggie is shaken awake by nightmares of the zombie attack as she wakens up, opens her eyes, and peers at her bite wound as maggots are already attempting to dig into her decaying flesh. No matter how many good memories they create together in these final weeks, the reality of her dying state will become louder and more apparent. The next day, as she tries to normally paint her fingernails, the distant thunder booms ahead of her. The distant thunder booms even louder as her childhood friend Allie comes to pick her up for a bonfire with a bunch of her high school friends. Allie states that school is going to be starting soon and it's such a bummer, as Allie attempts to just be her friend and take her out for a night of fun to just distract herself from what's to come. Attending the bonfire, this will be the most normal Maggie's felt since running away. For a teenager, being around people of the same age and just laughing and goofing off and gossiping is part of the human experience. Coming of age. However, the indiscernible banter and chatter that is heard is abruptly halted by a boy asking why schools are even opening up so soon, saying nothing is normal because of all the infected people out there, shaking not only Maggie to her core, but Maggie's ex-boyfriend Trent, who was also in the late stages of the infection. The boy brings back how reality should supersede emotion and saying Bonnie screwed up not telling authorities of her infected family and that quarantine should be the only answer for those that are infected. Trent is reasonably offended and states that he has heard stories of how the infected are treated in that very quarantine. The public image of quarantine is vastly different to what actually happens within. People are not taken care of. They are taken care of.
They tell people everything's nice, that they'll hold your hand until the end, but they don't. They throw you in a big room with everyone else. Everyone's all bunched up together, people eating people, and they don't care.
In an efficient but inhumane way, Trent then goes on to say that he would rather kill himself than face an end so grim. But in private with Maggie, he knows that his friend was just afraid and didn't know what to say or do about the pandemic. Trent tells Maggie how he had been bitten. Trent saw an infected woman by herself, as if she was in pain, and his natural response was to try and help her, and in that split second, he drew too close to her. That's all it took for the zombie to bite him. Him just wanting to help someone that couldn't be helped marked his fate of death. Maggie is dropped off by her best friend Allie, who both act as if they will just hang out again soon, but both knowing this would be their last encounter, and saying they love each other, because this part of her life was now coming to a close. Going inside, Caroline looks her over and peers into her whitened eyes when Maggie starts breathing in, stating she smells something good downstairs, thinking Wade was cooking something that smelled delicious, despite no food being prepared, nor Wade even being within the house. Caroline, after being so hesitant for so long, finally became comfortable with Maggie and her condition. But then she realized that a heightened sense of smell means things are worse, and she silently grabs a nearby pair of scissors, fearing the worst. Caroline tried, but still fears what Maggie will become at any moment. That is just the survival instinct of any man, woman, or child. This one-sided interaction is interrupted when her ex Trent calls her on the phone. She goes over to his house to find Trent's father pointing a shotgun at his bedroom door in a panicked state. The time has come for the only love she knew. Trent's own father, not even consoling him in his last moments in his own home. All he was doing was preparing to kill him, fearing for his own life over his own son's. Trent says he can smell his own father like he is meat, his eyes now completely swallowed in darkness, thus prompting his father to call quarantine efforts to take him away. Maggie tries to console him as police raid the home to take him away. Sheriff Pierce stands behind her, wanting her not to see what happens next, not only because of the ill fate that Trent said befalls anyone that is forced into quarantine, but also to avoid seeing what's a possible, inevitable outcome for her in the near future. Trent is dragged away by authorities as he desperately calls for his dad to help him, but with no answer there. The destiny he feared for himself, from the rumors that he had heard, was now his only way out of this world. Trent was on the brink of full infection, and so too was Maggie as she goes out by herself. No one around her, she arms herself with her father's gun, and then hears the yelps and then smells the scent of a nearby trapped fox. Acting not like a person, but a wheezing zombie acting on pure instinct, she shoots and eats parts of the fox while it was still alive, before realizing what she was doing. She runs home, blood soaking her face and clothes. This sight and the reaction of her father and stepmother deafens the world around her. The only words reaching her in this state are the ones she now feared the most.
Wait! We have to take her in! No! We have to take her in now!
The world deafened even more before the calming words of her father snapped her back to reality. The PTSD of what she just did, having her mentally pulled in all directions. Wade attempts to hold her, prompting her to speak in a monstrous way. The final stages of the infection are definitively settling in, biologically for her and mentally for everyone there. Caroline has had enough and leaves the house for the final time, but not before saying that it is too late for Maggie, that Wade has to send her to quarantine. Wade, responding to her as if she were just a heartless witch, asks if this would be the same case if her own children had become infected and if they would have received the same treatment. Caroline states she viewed Maggie as her own daughter, but reiterates she is not the same little girl anymore. Caroline tried for the time she was there, but the fear of being bitten, of losing her life, leaving behind her own children without a mother, and facing the zombified husk of her stepdaughter prompts her to leave. Now, it wasn't that she wasn't strong enough. Many people I could see being mad at her, but this is just a fact of how some people would go about the zombification of a loved one, not being mentally able to handle seeing and being a part of a loved one becoming a ravenous monster. How many of us wouldn't be like her in her shoes? Now, how many of us are lying to ourselves unless that reality were to actually happen to us? The last night of Maggie's life, the distant booms of thunder with no storm in sight echo louder as Maggie looms over her slumbering father with a blank, deadened stare. He awakens to the sight, causing her to run away in fear. Her silent contemplation was broken. In the day, as he tends to his farm, Wade is confronted by Sheriff Pierce and Deputy Holt, who now know how severe her infection has progressed. Holt holds no bars, saying she is a threat to the town and that it's well beyond her time to go into quarantine or die. Holt harnessing the fear of all non-infected people in the town, hell, in the whole population, that want to nip this Maggie problem in the bud, and begins to storm to Wade's home, trying to brush him off like her father is being irrational in the face of the public good. He doesn't care if it's his daughter. All it takes is one slip up and it will cause more harm, more infections, and more sorrow. Wade commands that they are not taking her away as they fight each other, and Pierce readies his shotgun to take out Wade. Before the trigger can be pulled, Maggie comes out of nowhere, completely inhuman-like in appearance, darkened flesh, her eyes are completely whitened. She yells for them to all stop. Maggie saving her father's life as Pierce gives Wade one more day with her to decide how things will play out. The town, the authorities, everyone except the father and daughter are ready to end this affair, all while the thunder booming far away now sounds like it's right above them. It is looming above them. The storm is nearly there and waiting for the downpour. The police leave. Peace is momentary. Wade decides to show her one last scene of beauty in this world that had darkened around her. In the time that Maggie was missing, Wade would return home each day just to plant daisies in a patch near their home. Daisies, the favorite flower of Maggie's deceased mother and his wife, and the nickname she had given Maggie when she was young. Among the dying fields of trees and crops that swallowed the area that were burned down or just dead around their home was this bright, white beacon of love and hope. A memoriam for both of the women of Wade's original life, and something to find compassion in amongst a world that abandoned Maggie and treated her like a leper. The sight bringing tears to her clouded eyes, Maggie asks her father to be the one to end her life. Knowing what would happen to her if she was taken away, what happened to Trent, and how his last moments in this world were probably of misery, she wanted to end her time in the place she grew up, and with the man that raised her. An insurmountably tall order for a father to hear from his little girl. He accepts her request. One last time, as Wade ponders on how she will depart this world, the doctor arrives at his home with the concoction used for quarantine infected so that they may die, but in a painful manner. Only showing up to display how 2 out of 3 of these options would mean a horrible end for her last moments, but to say that a gun would be, again, a quick and painless way to go. Bringing the vial, despite actually having the chemical, was an empty gesture, as he just wanted to accentuate what was best for her. Maggie calls her step-siblings to say her goodbyes when she falls to the ground, almost lifeless. It's when Wade walks in to aid her, she grabs his shirt as if she has already turned. Despite her eyes now completely swallowed into the void of darkness, she recognizes her daddy and stops herself. The time was indeed here. The method of her end must be decided now. Wade silently grabs his gun as he eases into his chair. He finds Maggie's phone, the battery nearly dead, with only one picture of her mother and her when she was a baby, brightening the shadows that filled the room around him. As he looks up on the phone, the light fades into darkness as the phone dies. The vision of his wife and child are gone. Unable to do what needed to be done, he falls asleep in his chair. The next morning, Maggie awakens, the infection's toll on her body causing her to wheeze uncontrollably, her skin almost completely blackened as she continuously sniffs her father's scent. As the scene intensifies and we think she is about to sink her teeth into her father's flesh, she simply just kisses his head, while the necklace of her mother dangles between them. Using the last bits of her humanity, she is able to restrain herself from biting her father as she ascends the stairs above. Awake during this entire encounter, Wade had accepted his fate no matter what would have happened. Wade then opens his eyes and arms his shotgun, prepared to do what needed to be done. These words echoing in his head.
Think about what you had to do today, what you might have to do in the future.
Not wanting his girl to suffer or become a monster. Maggie climbs on the roof, breathing in one last breath. As a living, breathing human, she remembers the few memories of her mother, the spiraling reflection in her eyes, capturing the last moments of consciousness before either the infection takes hold of her, or her father. Her last thoughts were of two bits of imagery. The first, of a singular, beautiful daisy being plucked from the earth and descending to the sky above. The flower that represented her and how its beauty of life was clipped away in an instant. And the second, being her holding hands with her mother. Now, with it all over, she can join her long-lost mother in the beyond, in the great white light, in the answer to what comes after, before it all leads into darkness and the end of a girl named Maggie. Maggie was a zombie movie unlike anything I have seen before. While some may find it drags on for a bit, I wholly love how it shows how people are when it comes to the aftermath of an outbreak and coming to terms with mortality in a short amount of time. What it means to try to get back into normalcy for society, and the cost of what that means for anyone that becomes infected. They aren't seen as human anymore, just potential monsters that should be corralled, herded, and tossed away by the dozens. How they depart this world before succumbing to the virus not really mattering for the greater good. Maggie saw what could have happened to her. She could have become a zombie herself that infected and killed her loved ones because the loved ones didn't want her to die or be taken away. To be taken into quarantine herself, to just be treated like livestock, to be stuffed in a room to either be eaten alive or eat others, or be injected with a chemical that would have made her last moments be filled with unbearable pain, with no one she knows around to hold her hand and console her into the beyond. While she may have perished with no hope of surviving, she was able to experience the immeasurable love of her father, the glimpse of coming of age with her friends, the kiss of a love, and seeing the world for what it truly is and what it will become, but also seeing beauty amongst all the fear, death, and darkness. Maggie was a breath of fresh air amongst the sea of zombie movies I have watched, and I highly recommend it to those who want more than just zombie killing and surviving. It's a different aspect and taste of a zombie world. Even though it's depressing as all hell, I won't deny that, sometimes it's good to be reminded how things are and also how we should cherish the time we have with our loved ones, because you never know when things may come to an end, or when life may suddenly come to a screeching halt, and how differently things will play out. The use of the zombie virus to show just someone slowly fading away and what it can turn people into and how they face the grim truth of death is exemplified in this movie, and I couldn't recommend it enough. Now, I'll save you the banter of my typical outros and just say thank you to my Patreon patrons and YouTube channel members for supporting the channel as they appear here. Thank you for watching my in-depth look into Maggie, and if you would like more videos like this, let me know in the comments. Is there something that gripped you within the zombie medium like this that you think I should cover? Let me know. Sorry if my voice seems kind of hoarse. I've been sick for the last few days and I'm trying to get my voice working better. Anyways, thank you for listening to my raspy voice through this in-depth analysis, and until next time guys, I'm Zach S, aka Wow Such Gaming. Never forget to stay happy, stay healthy, love those around you, and tell them so, and stay wow!